To Dianmai is to come at the meridian as you approach a canvas like a painter. So you're going to dot that energetic flow in a very precise and gentle and even artistic manner. It's not about it, the verb itself is not about blunt striking.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Qiological, the podcast that connects the voices of our East Asian medicine community. I hear a lot from all kinds of practitioners these days, people that have been at it for a while, newer practitioners. You know, a lot of times the newer practitioners, they always say things like, oh, I'm just a newbie. It takes 10 or 20 years to get good at this stuff and to be a good practitioner, and it's so hard to become a good practitioner. You know, I suspect it actually takes time to get good at anything. And when it comes to doing Chinese medicine, we actually create a lot of trouble when we hold ourselves hostage to, air quotes here, getting it right. Now, I'm not suggesting that we be careless in our work. I'm far from it. At the same time, I think it's easy to freeze up when all we can focus on is, did I do it right? What will my patients say if I can't help them in a single treatment? And those thoughts like, how am I comparing myself with that clinic down the street? Or am I trying to please my teachers even though they're just echoes in my head? And has this happened to you in clinic where you're thinking, those idiots, when my patients tell stories of the other practitioners who didn't get it right? Probably not so helpful for yourself either when you think about that. How comfortable are you with recognizing that you don't completely understand a situation, but willing enough to risk the commitment to a clear course of treatment so you have the opportunity to learn from the results? I suspect there's a lot of getting it wrong on the way to getting it right. I don't think it's so much about the time that you put in. After all, you can do something 10,000 times. It doesn't guarantee any kind of success, especially if you're making the same mistakes over and over again. And you might find it helpful to consider the qualities of what you consider a good practitioner to be. Who are they in clinic or in their daily life? And how do they approach problems anyway? How do they feel about and work with money? And what do they do when they don't know what to do? My guess is that the good practitioner of our imagination at the beginning may not look much like the kind of practitioner that we actually grow into. There are usually some surprises along the way. There's the small things that make a big difference. There's the big things that turn out not to be so insurmountable. Mostly, I suspect that things just take time. And it helps to be able to move at the pace of nature as we slowly unfold more experience in our clinic. And that we bring our attentiveness and our willingness to allow our patients and our experience to teach us. That we do our level best in the moment that we find ourselves in, and perhaps be less concerned with getting it right and more attentive to gently noticing when we miss the mark, and see how that changes the way we approach our work in the future. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. All the sponsors here provide helpful products or services that you'll find beneficial in your clinical work. Want to get better at treating concussions and other neurological conditions? Clayton Shu has some innovative methods. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. Later in the show, Jane offers you helpful suggestions on how to raise your rates, and Golden Flower Chinese Herbs shares a journey of healing that I think you'll recognize. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more. Ever found yourself listening to a geological conversation and thinking, wow, I needed to hear that? Yeah, me too. And I never know when I'm going to hear a guest say something that stops my world and reboots it with a larger perspective. If these conversations have ever helped you to feel more grounded, more inspired, or just less alone in this strange and wonderful work we do, consider becoming a member or supporting the podcast with a bit of tithing to the donation jar. It helps keep the lights on here at the Geological Sound and Motion Lab so that we can bring you these conversations every Tuesday morning. You'll find all the details at geological.com. Thanks for listening and for being a part of this.
Hey there, I'm Cameron Jafari, an acupuncturist from Los Angeles. So I started learning nanopuncture from Dr. Clayton Shu because I was facing these complex neurological conditions like stroke and MS in my clinic, and I just felt like I lacked a solid process to treat them. Brain-related issues always felt like a whole different animal, and I was looking for a clinical system that worked and could guide me through them. So after attending my first nanopuncture seminar, I was able to apply the process pretty quickly and with pretty amazing results. I remember the first stroke patient I saw afterwards was a guy who had had a stroke 2 years back, and he couldn't talk at all. And after a few treatments, he started saying a few words. And a few treatments after that, he could actually have conversations. It was pretty incredible. So this is why I feel like nanopuncture is the future of acupuncture neurology. And you can be a part of that. Their next seminar is on treating concussions and is being co-taught by both Dr. Shu and Dr. Ayla Wolf in New York City on April 26th and 27th. To learn more, visit nanopunctureseminars.com.
On to a discussion with Jonathan Bluestein. Today, we're going to be talking about the martial use of acupuncture points. Yeah, those things that we usually use for healing. Those things you can do to mess people up as well. And we're going to take a look at some of those, but more importantly, and one of the things that I found really interesting about this conversation is looking at some of the ways that the body and the meridians are put together. Stuff that we already know from a medical perspective. It's kind of interesting hearing about it from the martial side of things. So, as ever, thanks for listening. And you know I love those postcards. My guest today is Jonathan Bluestein. If you're a listener of Everyday Acupuncture Podcast, you heard him on show number 82. We were talking about the martial arts, and we took a hard left turn into Jungian psychology and how it matches up with the Bagua. That was a really fascinating conversation. If you haven't listened to it, you might want to check it out. Today, we're going to get more technical and deep and geeky into acupuncture points. And acupuncture points, not just from the medical point of view, but from the martial point of view. I don't know about you guys, but I find that I've got a lot of usually young men, and they like to ask the question, hey, is there a point where you can press someone and paralyze them like, I saw in that Kung Fu movie? And my thought's always been, well, I don't know. So I got Jonathan here. We're going to get into this stuff. Jonathan, welcome to Geological.
Hey, it's just an honor to be here for the second time. I immensely enjoyed our first interaction on Everyday Acupuncture, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, me too. That was fun. That last conversation, I thought we were just going to talk about martial arts and internal cultivation. And man, it quickly went into the Bagua and Jungian psychology. And holy smokes, that was a really fun rabbit hole.
Yes, some really fascinating stuff. You owe it to yourselves to check that one out.
Yeah, let's plug that show. Good. So, like I was just saying, I don't know if you get the question over there. I mean, you're a martial artist, so maybe you do get the question, but I know that on occasion, I do hear from younger people, usually men. Never had a woman ask me about, for some reason.
Maybe they know their own points, and men.
They already do some Kung Fu, man. So, looking at the martial use of acupuncture points. I mean, that's actually a really interesting thing. And I don't know really anything about that. So I'm curious to know if in the martial arts traditions there is a particular study of what we call the acupuncture points, Shui, and in a martial perspective or a martial use of these points that we generally use for healing.
Yes, there is. And the way we should actually describe it is the science that traditional Chinese martial arts, and we'd be strictly talking about traditional Chinese martial arts because this is what I practice and teach. The science of using acupuncture points comes from the science of the Chinese people, which is Chinese philosophy and Chinese medicine. This is the traditional science that the Chinese people had developed to deal with their own daily lives. So in the West, if we're talking about Western martial arts, be they traditional or modern, they would be using terminology that stems from Western anatomy, that came down from the Renaissance and the Industrial Revolution and modern times. So they would be talking about the nerve plexus, this or that, and the bodily systems as they are taught in Western medical school. However, in traditional Chinese martial arts, what kind of science did they have to explain how the body works? Well, they didn't have Western anatomy and they did not have Western biology or chemistry. They explained everything in terms of Chinese philosophy and traditional Chinese medicine. So these are the tools they had. And provided that martial arts originally across the world were always first and foremost means to hurt other people, then people were interested in the science of how to make it work. And of course, after they've done beating each other in very simplistic ways, over time they pass on these traditions to their sons and grandchildren, grand grandchildren, and along the way, people develop these martial arts into some more sophisticated vehicles for delivering violence, but not just violence, of course, because in traditional Chinese martial arts, once more, if taught traditionally, it's a whole universe. It's far more than violence. It's also about self-cultivation and medicine, both healing yourself and other people. It's about psychology of yourself and other people, and sociology, the way we interact with each other, etc., etc. So it's nowadays traditional Chinese martial arts for the past few hundred years have developed to be far more than vehicles for delivering violence. But originally, that's the intention. I mean, that's what they're interested in. So we should never forget this. The art is like a hammer. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, but it depends on which nail you're pointing your hammer at. You could be thinking that the other guy's forehead is a nail, and you can also be using that hammer to build a house or to help someone repair his shed after a storm. So depends on you how you use your art and cultivate it. That depends on the teacher how he teaches his students and what he tells them that the art can be used for. So as for the points, many people think that it's a simple matter. You have the location of a point, you strike it, and something magical happens. But it's a bit more complicated than that. So generally speaking, in martial arts, okay, we use the acupuncture points from traditional Chinese medicine and the meridians in three different ways. We can use them for martial purposes. That's generally called dianmai or dimak in Cantonese. Many people are familiar with the term dimak. And we can use them for healing as a form of qigong, because when we're talking about the points and the meridians in the martial arts, we're not using needles. We're not commonly using massage because it's a martial practice. We might use the massage after practice, but during the actual martial practice. Or we might use them to guide movement and alignment. Now we're going to touch upon all three of these things, Dianmai and Qigong, and using the points and the meridians as reference points for movement and alignment. And I just want to touch about the name, Dianmai. Dianmai, it evokes a very specific type of action in the mind of a Chinese person. Because Dian is the
So
verb.
which yang is this? Yang mai.
No,
What
no,
yang is this?
dian, dian mai, dian.
Dian mai. Oh,
Yeah,
dian.
dian,
Okay.
dian. So to dian is the verb for to dot, but it's not just to dot, to put a dot like you put
Ah.
with a pen. It's the type of dot where you very carefully approach a canvas, maybe atop a wall, and yet just very gently place that perfect dot in the perfect spot. And it's a very gentle and precise type of movement. That's what this verb is talking about. And mai in this respect is simply a meridian. So a meridian being, of course, the connective river between the points. So to Dianmai is to come at the meridian as you approach a canvas like a painter. So you're going to dot that energetic flow in a very precise and gentle and even artistic manner. It's not about it, the verb itself is not about blunt striking. It's not very overt. Rather, it's very, when you think about the verb itself, you already are trying to orient your fingers to be very precise. So it's a fascinating thing in the Chinese language and in many other languages, the use of very specific words and verbs to evoke a description that makes you move or think in a certain way. And that's a very good example.
It's a great example. And it's fascinating how these Chinese words, these Chinese characters, the concepts behind them, when you start to open your mind into it, it literally will change your perception and it will change how you interact with things. And I'm thinking this idea of Dianmai, this is how a person doing acupuncture approaches doing acupuncture. I mean, if we're really doing acupuncture, we're coming at it with a similar kind of intent and a similar sense of interaction.
You hold the needle like you hold a fierce tiger, right? It has to be very, you have to really, I don't know how to really describe this in terms of how they teach TCM practitioners. Maybe you'd give a better description here.
Well, I mean, there's everything from the basic mechanics of how you hold a needle and you stick it into meat to being able to pay attention to what's at the tip of the needle, being able to pay attention to what's structures the needle's going through, to being able to pay attention to what's the feeling that comes through the needle. I mean, I would say there is a whole spectrum of things that we're paying attention to.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the concept of dirty. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and to achieve dirty, you need the correct yi. You need the correct intention. Now, this correlates with the martial arts as well. In the internal Chinese martial arts, there is also this concept of yi. And you could say that you receive the qi of, rather than the needle or the qi coming through the needle, you receive it from the opponent. So maybe you receive the feeling of how the opponent is rooted. This is a form of qi, actually, of the entire body of the opponent as he is being rooted or unrooted, balanced or unbalanced. And you achieve this if you correctly, in your training, use the correct intention, the correct yi. So the yi, just to explain this very shortly, yi in the traditional Chinese internal martial arts means that you use guided imagery to trick your muscles and your body to feel while you practice certain sensations, sometimes as if the opponent is there, sometimes other sensations, or to activate certain bodily systems or to control the meridians. So when you actually come in touch with an opponent, your body and your structure have the correct feeling of how to interact with him. So it creates, even without an opponent present in your training, the right feeling and the right structure and the right connection to the earth, etc., and the right energetic flow. And this is very important because if people move their hands and feet about in the air without the correct yi, without the correct intention, then their practice is empty. And then it's not as effective being translated from empty handed practice to practicing with a partner or against an opponent.
So what you're doing with your mind has a lot to do with the training.
Definitely, definitely, it's very
Yeah.
important. It's a bit distance from the topic of Dianma and the points and everything, but we might get to that at another time.
Let's get into some of the points. Are there any major points that you're looking at to use in a martial sort of way?
Okay, so like I said, there are three different uses in the martial arts. You might use the points to guide or align movement. That is, especially when you teach someone, you want to align their body correctly. So you use the points as reference for either yourself or for them to help them align themselves better. And there is the use of points for healing and the use of points for martial usage. So I think it's easier if we begin with alignment. That gives us an introduction to the main points being used. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I'm chuckling over here on the inside because I remember my Tai Chi teacher in Beijing who would describe certain ways of how I would like move my hand, and he'd go, "Oh yeah, well it comes up through, and he would put his finger on small intestine 3. He goes, "It comes, bring your attention here, and it comes, it comes up like this." And before I thought I was just like, raising my hand in a certain way. But then when I put my attention on, the energy comes up and through small intestine 3.
Oh, definitely.
The whole arm, the whole channel is involved in the movement now. I'm not just floating my hand up. The whole thing moves as a integrated part of a whole.
Well, traditional Chinese martial arts are accurate down to the millimeter. And people are very surprised when I teach them. They might practice with a partner and they're incapable of moving their partner even an inch.
Okay.
So you change students' fingers alignment by maybe an inch or two. Suddenly their partner goes flying. And they're amazed. How can they move them with such ease? What happened? Well, this often has to do with tendons and connective tissues because when you have proper alignment, then your kinetic energy and your chi can flow much better. But if you are misaligned, often by just 1 or 2 inches, that makes a whole lot of a difference. Also, the concept of opening and closing in Chinese martial arts, this is a big concept.
Kaihe.
The, yeah, kaihe. You should distinguish and differentiate between being open and closed, which are used for different things. Most commonly, you close down to pull your opponent towards you, and you open to push them back. So if your fingers close in, if your fingers or elbows or wrists close towards the center of your body, then that tends to pull the opponent towards you. And if they open, then it does the opposite. So that makes a big difference. And points are used as reference for that as well. And I think you've been very lucky to have a Taiji teacher like that, because I've heard that a very famous Taiji teacher, Wang Paishang, who is already deceased, is the head of a very famous lineage of traditional Chinese martial arts, Wang Paishang. And he used to teach like that. He used to tell his students, this point would go to this point. And he would just name the points. He wouldn't tell them where to move their hands or feet, just the points.
Yeah. It was eye opening to me. Well, body and mind opening, really. And, grateful that I'd studied the Chinese medicine because all he had to do was touch the point or name it. And everything, all the experience I had with that point or that meridian would suddenly come into the room and be brought to bear. It was quite extraordinary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because, well, it's like what Kongzi said, Confucius. I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly that.
So I think it's great hearing you talk about how, when considering the martial uses of points, the very first thing you're doing is learning how to align yourself, learning how to come into some kind of coherence with yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's talk about that, really. So I would say the four most important points in traditional Chinese martial arts by far are the Baihui, the Huiyin, the Dantian, and the Mingmen. So Baihui and Huiyin, Of course, at the top of the governing vessel and the conception vessel. And you use these points as reference for erecting the spine. So what you do and you tell your students to do is you pressure the baihui up as fiercely as you can, even if you feel that it's a bit overt. Still, you should use pressure, and that erects the spine whilst sucking in the huyin. So you suck it in the way the imagery I use for students. I always tell them, imagine you have a vacuum cleaner against your hand, and it kind of sucks in. So now imagine that vacuum cleaner within your belly, and its mouth is the huyin. So the huyin pulls up, the baihui pressures up, and then that erects the spine. So, but the huyin, what it does, it encourages the body to undergo posterior pelvic tilt. So when you tilt your pelvis backwards, and that straightens the lower part of the spine up to the middle of the spine, and it opens the Mingmen. So the reason I want to say earlier that I tell them to fiercely press the baihui is that most people have some form of neck misalignment. And because of that, even when they are misaligned, they feel that their neck is straight because they're used to the feeling of how their neck is in daily life.
Right. I've seen people all the time. They come into my clinic. One of the first things I do, I just have them stand and I want to look at them and I want to see how they hold their body because they might think they're straight or their shoulders are straight or their hips are straight. Often not the case. But yeah, you're right. What we get used to becomes normal.
Yeah, so your concept of straight becomes distorted and disoriented. And to
Mm-hmm.
correct that, you use the points for reference. Another traditional thought on baihui is to imagine yourself suspended from the air like a piece of cloth hanging, like being hung from a clothing hanger from the baihui. So at the same time, you're pressing it up, but you're also being hung from above. And that what it does is it straightens the spine, and then it opens the gaps between the vertebrae.
Ah, right. So people that have degenerative disc disease or stenosis, this kind of a practice could help take some of that pressure off.
Yeah, that's very helpful, and that's prevalent. It's throughout traditional Chinese martial arts and qigong. It's just very common instruction. It's very useful. Some teachers and people say, imagine that you have a book atop your head, or they even put a book upon their head for just a while for them to get used to the sensation. That we said 4 points is Bai Hui, Huiyin, Dantian, and Mingman. So Dantian, of course, without Dantian, there is no energetic practice. I mean, the traditional Chinese martial arts and Qigong just simply do not work if you do not breathe down to your Dantian. Now, of course, if we were to consider this anatomically, you cannot lower your breath to the Dantian. It's an oxymoron. It cannot be done. What's being done is you are filling up your lungs to their fullest capacity, and then you pressure the diaphragm down to fill them up some more. And then all of this pressure feels as if you lowered your breath into the dantian. And this and it doesn't make sense anatomically. If you were to explain to a doctor where the dantian is, a Western medicine doctor, and you tell him breathe there, they'd say it doesn't make sense. Well, of course it doesn't make sense. It makes sense in the context of trying to make you get the right feeling. It's not meant to be anatomically correct. It's meant to evoke the right kind of practice. And together with breathing to the dantian and expanding it, you're told to open the Mingman. And to open the Mingman, you need to straighten even more the lower spine. And there's actually a feeling of opening in that area. So the dantian expands, the whole belly cavity expands like a ball, and then you can farther stretch the spine and that spot. And it's interesting, the Mingman is in the middle of what's called the thoracolumbar fascia. And that's the piece of connective tissue, the thoracolumbar fascia, which connects the latissimus dorsi with the gluteus maximus. So that's actually your main power hub in your body. If we were to imagine, as humans, we're now bipedal. But if we were standing on all fours, then the Mingman would have been just the main power hub of the body. It's through that point that all kinetic power is transferred through the rear legs to the front hands, and back. And if we can, and this is the thinking with traditional Chinese martial arts, if we can go back to that more primordial state of kinetic power transference, which the apes still use, and the quadrupedal, how would you say that word? The quadruple, the animals that walk on fours, gather.
Quadruped.
Quadrupeds use, yeah.
Yeah. So like I'm thinking of like watching a cheetah run, those super fast cats,
Mm-hmm.
and you watch how their spines move and you look where their power comes from.
Yeah, and the spine moves like a wave, and
Yes.
the rear legs put in the power, and that power travels as a wave, escalating in their own Mingman and travels to their front legs. So they can recycle that power in a kinetic wave form, which you do in traditional Chinese martial arts. So without these four things, the Bai Hui, the Huiyin, the Dantian, and the Mingman, you really can't have any so-called internal practice either in the Chinese martial arts or Qigong. And together with that is the touching of the tongue at the roof of the mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what it does two things. First of all, in terms of Western science and medicine, if you erect the spine, you breathe to the Dantian, and you place your tongue at the roof of the mouth, then you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest part of the nervous system.
Now, how does it do that?
Good question. I'm not sure what the mechanism is. I just know that it works. I can make it work on myself and easily teach it to others.
So patients that are anxious and they're in a hypersympathetic mode, just get them to connect up the microcosmic orbit and they're already on their way to settling down.
Oh yeah, actually, you can take their fingers and help them place their own fingers on their dantian. Should be their own fingers. I've had some bad experiences with touching people's dantian. If it's most men are okay with it, sometimes they're not, but with women that can be a disaster. So you place their own fingers on their dantian, and you make them press the fingers a bit inward so they can feel their dantian pushing if they breathe through that area correctly. And then you place them on a very straight, erect chair. Preferably they would sit on the floor, but you have to use chairs because most people have difficulty sitting on the floor these days. And then you gently tuck in their chin and help them press their bai hui. And you very gently help them remain in that position. Tell them to hold their tongue at the roof of the mouth, and you have to explain to them where it is because they often don't know where the roof of the mouth is. And if you can keep them in that state for as little as 5 minutes, breathing deeply, their whole emotional and mental state changes dramatically.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that I use to keep my practice running smoothly. So, let's talk about something that can be a little bit uncomfortable, raising your fees. I know, this is something that might feel awkward, but it doesn't have to. With a bit of planning and care, you can handle it in a way that feels right for you and your patients. One tip, give yourself at least 2 months to prepare. This gives you time to get comfortable with the change and let your patients know what's happening. You can share the news through emails, booking reminders, or even just a friendly little sign in your clinic, and avoid over-apologizing. Instead, keep it straightforward and matter of fact. Keeping things consistent across the ways that you communicate can really help avoid confusion. Fee increases aren't always easy, but you're not on your own here. For more tips and ideas on how to communicate these changes with confidence, check out frontdesk.chain.app and look for the article, How to Tell Your Clients You're Raising Your Fees. Oh, and one last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. I've seen something very much like this, something that just, it came out of my practice. Maybe it's some of the Qigong practice I've done in the past, but at a certain point when patients would come in, they'd be very agitated or anxious. I'd say, there's actually a very easy way. Oh, and especially if they say, I feel like I can't get a deep breath. I say, oh, there's a very easy way to work with this, right? Because if you're saying to yourself, I need a deep breath, you're probably not going to get a deep breath because your mental process is already offline. So what I teach them to do, very similar. And they can actually do it anywhere. They can do it sitting. They could do it in their car at a stoplight. I just say, take one of your two hands, if you have one handy, put it on your lower belly, just under your belly button, and simply breathe so that your breath makes the hand float up in your belly. Just do that. Just use your physiology. Don't even use your thought. Just use your physiology. Pay attention to your breath going into your belly, going into your hand. And it has very similar effect. They do that for a minute and they're already in a different place.
Yeah, that's great. And you see, even without straightening the spine completely, even sometimes without touching the tongue at the roof of the mouth, just deep breathing can do it on its own. It just made more effective if they can do the rest of the practice.
Yeah. So we've got the big four here, which I think most acupuncturists are already pretty familiar with. We know that this sort of constitutes the parameters north, south, east, and west of a human body.
Oh, definitely. So the girdle meridian and the governing vessel and the conception vessel.
Yep. There's your structure.
Mm-hmm. So other points which are important, not as important, but pretty important, are the Laogong and Yongquan, which are the parallel points on the palms and the feet. Now, these are used to elicit the right type of tendon activation. So the traditional instruction for these points, once more, both the Laogong and Yongquan, is to suck them in gently, like you'd suck the huiyin. And what this does is it stretches the tendons throughout the body. If you have these 4 points, it's like a tent being pulled on 4 sides. And the sheet of the tent are the body's connective tissues, being connected by the top, which is the Mingmen, and being inflated from the inside by the Dantian. And maybe we could say even that the rods holding the tent are the Baihui and the Huiyin to an extent, with some other things which I'll name momentarily. So these are very important. And then you have the Hegu, which is also called the Hukou, right? The tiger's mouth.
Yeah, the tiger's mouth. That's what they call it in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm. And it's called this for good reason. Actually, I suspect that the other name, tiger's mouth, came from the martial arts because that area between your index finger and your thumb is commonly used to choke someone or to strike someone. So a tiger's mouth in Chinese folklore and language is a slang for a dangerous place. Why is this a dangerous place? Because you use it to choke someone, right? It makes a whole lot of sense, that name, Hoko. And you need to round that area of Hoko. And by doing that, by rounding the area between your index finger and your thumb, you're actually, to some extent, activating Hegu, right? You're stretching the area of that point. It's, again, like a minor tent. Imagine if the 2 rods holding the tent are your index finger and your thumb, then maybe the top of the tent is the Hegu.
Well, I can feel it. I mean, we're having this conversation. I'm sitting here going, okay, looking at my hand, around that. Oh, that feels really different.
Yeah, it really stretches that point. So that's a good reference point. So because it's right there in the middle, you stretch that point, you stretch the Hoko correctly. And Okay, so we also have another point we can use for reference, which is the yaman, which is do 15 at the back of the neck. Now, it's used to help with the bai hui and hui yin, because if you press that point to the back, straight to the back, the yamen, then you erect the thoracic spine better.
So what do you mean by press it? Or you mean just like take your attention at that point and sort of push it outward?
Yeah, push it back as if you were leaning against the wall and you're trying to have that point touch the wall.
Yeah. Oh, it does change how your neck feels, doesn't it?
It does, definitely. Okay, and then we have the Zhongfu and Yunman, which are Lung 1 and Lung 2. Now, what does the lung meridian have to do with all of this? It's not so much the meridian in that case, but it's that area of lung 1 and lung 2. It needs to be concave and flaccid, like a plastic bag semi-filled with water. So it's a very interesting feeling. How can you make your chest and deltoid muscles feel like on the at the front feel like they're a plastic bag semi-filled with water? Well, you need to have utmost relaxation. That's one thing, but you also need to do something else. You need to abduct your scapulae. So that means rounding the upper back. You abduct the scapulae, and then you press the elbows forward very gently whilst keeping the chest relaxed. And now after you have abducted your scapula, you took them sideways and to the front, and you rounded the upper back, and you press the elbows forward. You can take one hand and touch the opposite side of the chest and the frontal deltoid, and you can feel them, and they should feel like a semi-filled water bag.
Again, this is so different than saying take your arm and hold it in this position.
Oh yeah, very
Right.
different.
I mean, we're looking at each other because the software that we're using to record this lets us see each other so I can see what you're doing. And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, hold your arm in this position. But it's very different than saying, bring your attention in this way to this place. Oh, my attention goes there. Make it feel like that. Automatically, my elbow and my hand start to move in space in a certain way. If you say things like abduct your scapula, I'm like, how do I do that? I don't even know how to do that consciously. But when you say make it feel like this, oh, I feel the scapula naturally moving in a certain way.
This is why the Chinese have come up with other images to help this too. They would say, okay, imagine you're trying to hug a big tree. So if you're trying to hug a big tree, you have to round your back and concave your chest. Han qiong ba bei. Han qiong ba bei. Round the back, concave the chest. And this is what is meant by Han qiong ba bei. Now, and then we have three other points that I want to mention in terms of alignment, which are very interesting. The Wei Yang, the Wei Zhong, and the Yin Gu, which are bladder 39, bladder 40, and kidney 10. Now, these points, bladder 39, bladder 40, and kidney 10, are perfectly aligned on a flat line right next to each other behind the knee. Now, why are these points important? These correspond with three tendons at the back of the knee, and they are associated with what we call rooting in the martial arts. Now, this is a so-called close-guarded secret. You know, there's so many things going on with rooting. People sell how to root DVDs. They sell how to root seminars. There are books about it, but it's actually quite simple. It comes from correct alignment. The notion of how to study this alignment, how to manifest it, that's the complex part. But the explanations are not complex at all. So part of the rooting process, first of all, what is meant by rooting? I mean, practitioners of traditional Chinese medicine are listening. They're not necessarily martial artists. The concept of rooting in traditional Chinese martial arts is that you are connected to the floor in a way that you are hard to move if you don't want to move. That if someone presses against you or even strikes you, then your rooting, your connectedness allows the body to transfer that power into the earth rather than being stuck inside the body. Also called the ground path. Having a ground path, it's like ground path for electricity. When the lightning strikes a building and it goes straight to the ground rather than starting a fire or something like that. So part of what creates rooting in these internal martial arts is to be able to stretch the tendons that correlate with Wei Yang, that's bladder 39, Wei Zhong, bladder 40, and Yin Wu, that's kidney 10. So if you place your fingers on each of these points, that you can feel, of course, that there are tendons right beneath them. And then what you're trying to do, if you are trying to root well, part of what you're doing is you're trying to, while you're standing, to stretch each of these tendons. So you should have 3 different tendons stretching. Of course, these are the tendons connecting the gastrocnemius muscles with the hamstrings. So they allow the springy power of the foot and shin tendons and the back of the shin from your feet and your gastrocnemius, that power to transfer well to the hamstrings or through the hamstrings from above back to the ground.
So this is a little bit like putting your tongue up to the roof of your mouth. You're really connecting something up that allows a larger system to flow.
Yes and no. It is an energetic connection. When you place your tongue at the roof of the mouth, usually it's just held there very gently. You might press it harder if you strike something, and that helps you brace all of your muscles and connective tissues for the strike. Is another something that's not often told, but it's common knowledge among teachers of traditional Chinese martial arts of authentic lineages. And then what you do with your tendons from behind your knees whilst you're standing, you're trying to stretch all 3 tendons, but you're trying to stretch the tendons without overtly flexing the muscles. So that's very difficult to do, because if you overtly flex the muscles, you can't move. If we all just flex as hard as we can, we're stuck in place. The idea is you pull out these 3 tendons so you have connection to the ground, but all the while, because your muscles are not flexed to the max, they shouldn't be even at 30 or 40% capacity, then you're also mobile, you can move freely. So this is a prevailing idea in traditional Chinese martial arts, that you should train and stretch the tendons more than you do the muscles. This is why there is not such a great emphasis on the development of muscles, but rather than of tendons. And the Chinese have this thinking that tendons are more important than muscles for power. They often point out that at the cow, they say, oh, the cow has huge muscles, but look how weak it is as compared to a human. For its size, I mean, a human can grab a bull sometimes by the horns and he can move him around. And the bull is huge. So how can it be done? It's because the bull, relative to his muscular size, is not so strong. Now, some other animals, like a cat, can be smaller than a human, but a cat can overcome a human. Sometimes a human cannot grab a hold of a strong cat because the cat has very powerful tendons. So thus far, we have spoken of alignment. And now we can get to martial usage of the points, which I'm sure many listeners were eager for us to get to.
All the 18-year-old guys.
Oh yeah, the 15-year-olds. I mean, I get all of these 12 and 15-year-olds. They see me at the park. Oh, can you paralyze someone if you touch them? I want to learn that. Teach me that trick. So let's see why it's a bit more complex than that. So first of all, even though the verb dian, to dot, is used to speak of dianmai, it's not just dotting or striking. You can also kind of squeeze or pressure or pinch or push or scrape. There are all sorts of ways to manipulate acupuncture points, as we do with tuina, as opposed to using acupuncture, of course. If we can even use herbs to get to the points. So all sorts of different ways. But to actually make a point do something significant, you need to know many things. First of all, you need to know 8 different things. First of all, you need to know the location of a given point. Then you need the meridian associated with the point. Then you need to know the relationship that point has with other points. And also you need to know the time of day in which this meridian is most active. Like we know from traditional Chinese medicine, it's not crucial or essential most of the time to use acupuncture or herbs at the exact time of day where and when the organ is most active, but to cause the most damage, martially speaking, that would be best. So you need to know that, and you need to know the angle at which the point needs to be struck or manipulated, and you need to know the depth at which the point has to be struck or manipulated, because like with needles, there are different depths to different points. And you need to know the type of power required to strike a certain point, because different types of powers are used in martial arts. And you need to know the type of striking surface. It's like the type of needle best suitable for striking the point. So there are so many things you need to know. It's almost ridiculous that you'd be able, in the midst of combat, in the heat of combat, to strike anyone, to hit something, and to cause an effect. And to be frank, most of the time, these points are being manipulated and cause damage by accident. It just happens. And most commonly, it happens in other sports. Believe it or not, it happens in soccer, in basketball, in hockey, especially ice hockey, of course, where they just happen to strike each other on certain points, and suddenly there is severe injury, or there's a heart attack, or there is a concussion. And the medical doctors don't really know how the hell that happened. Well, I should tell you that sometimes it happens because a very specific point or point combination happened to be struck by chance on a very specific time of day in a specific angle with the right type of surface. And every year across the world, people get seriously injured and even sometimes die because of these things.
Well, and I suspect too, if you're a skilled martial artist and you know where the points are and you know how to interact with them, and you're up against somebody who is not so skilled, it's probably a lot easier to get in and strike where you want to strike for
No, not
maximum effect.
necessarily. You'd
Not
be surprised.
necessarily.
Not necessarily, no, because oftentimes martial artists are more predictable. But someone who's very wild and maybe has only fought in bars all his life, and maybe he's drunk or under the influence of drugs, these
Mm.
people are often the most dangerous people. And they tend to kill more people than martial artists, of course. So, but going back on the subject here, so it's very difficult, but there are ways to do it, and I'll get to how it's trained and how it's done in the martial arts, despite the fact that you need to know all of these things. Just two things I want to mention before we get to that. So, generally speaking, for good Dyanmai to take place, for a very major effect, usually more than one point is targeted. I'm going to discuss a multitude of points today with the interview, but I'm not going to discuss the point combinations. And I just want to mention also before we get to the points themselves that there are some meridians which are most frequently targeted, which are just preferred by martial artists all over. And these happen to be the Renmai, the conception vessel, simply because it's very easy to locate on anyone's anatomy. It's just right there in the middle. And, many of these points, most of these points will cause some damage, oftentimes very serious damage. And then we have the second favorite is stomach meridian, which is easy to access, and it crosses the nipples. And because of it, you have the nipples as a reference point, and it's an easy reference point on the body. And it's the front of the body, so you can get to it. And generally speaking, hitting the stomach meridian well will cause all sorts of problems. And then we have the liver meridian, with two specific points, liver 13 and 14, which are quite popular. We'll get to that later. Now, I should say, in the past, part of the reason that people died from being struck badly on certain meridians and acupuncture points was because they couldn't be rushed to the hospital. So they would die from either internal bleeding or some energetic complications or all sorts of things within minutes to hours to days to weeks from just being struck. Nowadays, it's very difficult to kill someone with these sorts of methods unless it's instantaneous, because if you can get them to the hospital, most of the time modern medicine can save them. So once more, I mean, a lot of people say, you can get a gun nowadays. That's true. If someone wants to kill someone else, they can get a gun. But like I said before, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So once you already studied that sort of thing, you're eager to test it. This is why it's very important to have philosophy and etiquette and morality in the traditional teaching of martial arts. Otherwise, you're giving people the hammer, but you don't give them the instructions for that hammer.
And some thoughts about how they're going to use that hammer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do we find these points amidst combat? All sorts of ways. One way is to practice with live partners. We have practices like Tuisho, pushing hands, and Rosho, that's rolling hands in the Chinese arts, and it's like a semi-grappling, semi-striking form of practice, and it can turn into sparring match. It can just remain very friendly, but nonetheless you can use that opportunity to touch all the points whilst you're working with your life partner. So you get used to being moved by someone and moving someone, and once in a while you touch this or that point. So it helps you find these points on the human body, and that teaches you, well, of course, you need to know where the points are and you need to intend to do so. Otherwise, you'd never find them. Another method is that you can have the martial art move in a way that leads you to the points. And this is a very wise and sophisticated manner of practice. In my Juklum Southern Mantis system, the movements are intended so you naturally lead yourself to your own points or the opponent's points. Oftentimes, you touch your own points in practice as you move, and in that way, you learn where the points are on yourself, and then you know where they are on an opponent. That helps you a lot. Of course, the best way is to just be a practitioner of traditional Chinese medicine. That would significantly help you to know where the points are and to feel them, but you do need to feel them on a live partner or opponent. And then sometimes we also take advantage of some points which are just right next to each other. So some examples are Changqi, Sibai, and Zhuliao, which are stomach 1, 2, 3. With stomach 1, 2, 3 are just below the eyes, and these are very easily accessed points because you can target the eyeball, and if you miss and you hit lower, then you probably hit one of these points. And also because they're in a direct line below the eyeball, they're very easy to find, and they can be scraped. So you don't just usually you'd hit the striking surface for these points would usually be the fingers, several fingers held together, what's called the knife hand or ox tongue hand, they call it oftentimes in Chinese martial arts. And you can use it to just poke with the fingers in the direction of these points, or you can scrape from above to below, and scraping would also work for these points quite well.
So when you say scraping, are you referring to like using your fingernails to scrape?
Yeah, in a motion like painting a wall from up to down, scraping vertically. Yeah, not clawing, but rather holding your palm sideways and scraping vertically with your fingers held together. Other points which are close by and make an easier target are 跳口, 下主厨, and 放龙, which are stomach 38 to 40 on the shins. Because these points are so in such close proximity to each other, stomach 38, stomach 39, stomach 40, then if you kick that area, you'd probably hit one of them, if not three of them together. So they're more easily accessed, and it's a very rare coincidence for 3 points to be in such close proximity with such easy access for striking.
Imagine this. A patient walks into your clinic. They're carrying more than the pain in their body. There's a story there. A history woven with the stress of long days, the ache of things unsaid, and the quiet longing for something to shift. You listen, not just with your ears, but with your hands, your intuition, your heart. It's not just about needles or a formula. It's about connection. Understanding the threads that tie us together, mind, body, and spirit, that is where golden flower Chinese herbs comes in. Rooted in tradition and crafted with care, their formulas are more than herbs. They're a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern practice. Every bottle, a quiet partner in your work, helping you to meet your patients where they are. Because healing isn't just about treating symptoms, it's about creating trust, cultivating belonging, and helping someone feel truly seen. Golden Flower Chinese Herbs, your partner in practice and connection, where tradition meets care. I want to go back for just a second to the stomach 1, 2, and 3 and the scraping. Because I'm thinking, well, why wouldn't you just punch them there? What does scraping do that it has a martial effect?
It's interesting. The points react differently to a different type of power and to a different type of surface and depth, etc. So you don't get the same effect from striking these with just a fist as opposed to stabbing them directly, or better yet, scraping them. Why exactly, I cannot tell you, but I can tell you that, well, you can prove it easily. You can just pick your favorite victim and just very gently touch their face with a fist, just hit them very, very gently, or scrape them, or just poke them, and you'd see very different effects. A point,
What do you notice?
well, one hurts like hell, and one hurts, but they can take it. You know, if you punch there, unless you break the nose or you break the eye socket, doesn't have the same effect. Also, psychologically, scraping someone like that, especially if you go across the eye first, this is very disheartening. It feels like you're being haunted by an animal. This is something I tell my students often. If someone takes you to the ground and you're not good at ground grappling and you can afford to do so, bite them. If you bite them, they feel like they're being hunted by an animal. This freaks people out. Most people would immediately stand up, if not run, but they'll let you go. Because biting someone, unless, especially around the face or neck area, or in their private parts, or their belly, that freaks people out like nothing else. So, I mean, evolutionarily speaking, some things just freak us out, and that sort of scraping, it does its job at telling it. But let me give you some other examples. We also have the Zhongfu and Yunman, which are lung 1 and 2, which we already mentioned before. These are very good targets, and interestingly enough, these you'd hit with either your open palm or an empty fist. It's interesting. If you try to hit lung 1 and lung 2, especially lung 1, with a closed fist, as opposed to a semi-hollow fist, an empty fist, has a very different effect. Why exactly? I'm not sure, but it works much better. So you need to know the striking surface. But I mean, what I'm saying here, people can't just take it and use it, because you need an entire martial art and you need the right type of power. And to develop this power takes years and years, etc. You know, it's very complex. You can't just pick it up from an interview. But for those in the know, that might give them some ideas.
Well, I'm thinking as an acupuncturist here, thinking about lung 1 and 2. And if in some way you can go in there, because again, we're talking about the power of the meridians, we're talking about how tendons have more power than muscle. If you can go in and disrupt their breathing function in a way, that is going to power them down. And as you were talking about with the scraping across the stomach points, I would think it would kind of freak people out a bit, right? At a psychoemotive level, something's been disrupted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you what, the difference between, there are two areas that take the wind out of your sails. One is lung 1 and 2, and the other being liver 13. So Jiangman, liver 13, but they both take the wind out of your sails, but in very different ways. So you hit the lung, what you get is the person, they can't get the breathing to work right. As opposed to liver 13, what happens is, if it's a blunt strike, then it pressures the diaphragm up. It causes all of the oxygen to come out your body, and you make this sound like you're choking. And Once that happens, the body rushes the oxygen out of all your muscles. And oftentimes, when people are struck in the liver like that, they just fall on their knees or they fall to the ground because they don't have enough oxygen suddenly in their leg muscles to hold themselves standing. It very often happens in boxing. And with blunt striking, that can rupture the liver sometimes, which, of course, traditionally, historically, that had been lethal. Nowadays, you can save a person if they have a ruptured liver. You can rush them to their emergency room. But if you deliver a serious vibrating strike as opposed to a blunt strike to liver 13, right timing, right time of day perhaps, right angle, it needs to be diagonally towards the center of the body, then you can actually make their liver explode. And interestingly enough, the liver is the only physical organ in the human body which explodes.
I've never heard of an exploding liver. This is the first time. Other than a metaphoric idea of somebody being incredibly liver chi constrained.
It splatters like a water balloon splattering on the floor. That kind of explosion, not not the one that takes a building down. But yeah, that can be a very serious injury. But it's a very difficult type of power to develop. You know. Okay, so we also have, let's see, we have Taiyang. Taiyang is very popular in the martial arts. Oh, it belongs to a group here. I have written down. There are 4 points which are very inducive of concussions and loss of consciousness. Taiyang being one of them. Naturally, at the temples, everybody knows that. You don't have to practice traditional Chinese martial arts to know that. Then you have Sijiu Kong, which is triple warmer 23, as a very interesting mechanism to how you hit it. People tend to look in the direction that their arms go. So if you push their arms sideways, especially at the elbow, they tend to turn their heads sideways. And when they turn their heads sideways, it's exactly that area of Sijiu Kong that is exposed. And another interesting fact here is that you have to strike it diagonally from top to bottom. Yeah, I've tried this many a time with students. If you strike them diagonally from bottom to top, it hurts, but nothing happens. But if you strike Sijiu Kong diagonally from top to bottom, that really shakes up your brain. You can easily fracture the eyebrow ridge, of course, but it can also cause a concussion and loss of consciousness. Then we have Yintang, which of course is a no-brainer, literally, for causing concussions and loss of consciousness, but it's very difficult to hit. To hit the Yintang, you'd normally be using a phoenix eye fist with the index finger knuckle being the only one protruding, a very common method of striking in traditional Chinese martial arts, as opposed to Sijiu Kong, which you usually strike with an open palm, usually held sideways. And then the fourth point that's used to induce concussion or loss of consciousness would be Renying, which is stomach 9. It's
Mm-hmm.
all-time favorite. It's just all martial arts go for stomach 9. And you can hit it in all manner of ways, actually, a fist, fingers, a kick. A lot of things tend to work, but the fingers work best. And what happens with stomach 9 is very interesting. If you strike that point really, really hard, then the body senses that the blood supply to the brain is cut off momentarily, just for a fraction of a second. But that's enough for the brain to decide that you're probably experiencing serious physical trauma, and it puts you to sleep as a defense mechanism. So, because if you fall down, then all the blood tends to flow back to your head. It's much easier for the blood to just naturally. This is our fainting mechanism. That's partly why it's there. So if you strike stomach 9 hard, then people faint. And this is the origin of the infamous karate chop. The karate chop to the side of the neck, which works. It really does work.
Well, in Star Trek with Mr. Spock, sort of the same area, right?
Yeah, so this point is quite famous. This is where you'd be aiming, and you can do it, yes, with a sideways held palm, with the palm facing upward, but better yet with the fingers in all sorts of angles. It's made possible. So these 4 points: Taiyang, Kong, Yin Tang, and Renying. These are very good for concussion or loss of consciousness. Then a few other points I have here. We have Chue Pan, which is middle of clavicle. If you hit, it's very easy to locate because it's right there in the middle of the clavicle. You break the clavicle, well, the opponent wouldn't be able to move that side of his upper side of his body. If it's a good break and it breaks into several shards, sometimes one of these smaller shards can slowly, gradually travel across the body, and it can actually puncture the heart. So historically, that oftentimes killed people. And if you do this to someone, then they can't basically train martial arts anymore. Either clavicle or both you break for them, very bad. You'd use the base of the palm, the side of the palm, or you'd use the back fist, that just as closed fist snapping with the back, sometimes with one or two knuckles protruding. That's very easy to break the clavicle with. We have Rugan, which is stomach 18, under the nipple. It can break ribs and cause additional energetic damage.
Right. Not to mention puncture a lung.
But it's very difficult to puncture a lung, of course, unless you have really, really high skills, with your finger, because it's struck with the fingers. So it's quite challenging, but it has a very interesting method for getting to it. We have a natural inclination as human beings to hold our elbows attached to our bodies, elbows attached to the torso, and the hand, the arm, they parallel to the floor, not perpendicular, parallel to the floor. So put your elbow to the side of your torso with arm parallel to the floor. That's a very strong position. If your arm is at that position, you can carry a lot of weight, and people have a natural tendency to go for that sort of lever. They're strong there. So it's being used. If someone puts their hand there, or you put their hand there, or you pull their hand a bit, you can slide your own hand atop their hand with your fingers open, and you reach exactly that point. You reach Rugan, stomach 18.
There it is. So you use the anatomical landmarks to try to know where the point is so you can land your strike.
It's far easier, definitely, because otherwise it is a very difficult point to hit. Then we have Xiang Guan and Chuchuan, which are gallbladder 33 and liver 8. Gallbladder 33 and liver 8 at the sides of the knees. These are used to destroy the opponent's foothold. They can also dislocate or break a knee. Usually people kick them with the bottom of the feet or the ball of the foot. They can actually be hit and manipulated with the bones at the sides of the feet, just above the feet. What's the name of these bones?
You're talking about the fibula and the tibia?
Yeah, at the base of the fibula and the fibula and the tibia.
Oh man, I can't remember the names of those.
Yeah, but the listeners probably know which bones we're talking about. The two protruding spines right above your foot, at the right and the left side of your foot.
Right down at your ankle.
Yeah, right down at your ankle. So these bony spines can actually be used to hit these points, the gallbladder 33 and liver 8. And
wait a minute, are you talking about at the bottom of the foot or sort of at the knee?
No, between the knee and the foot, closer to the foot, at the base of the tibia and the fibula bones.
So you're saying use these points that are at the far end of the bones, striking those will affect the bones at the other end.
Oh, no. I'm saying you can use these protruding bones to strike the sides of the knees.
Ah, got it. So it's a kick basically.
It's a kick.
Except you're using those spinous processes at the lower part of your leg to deliver the strike. Got it.
Yeah, which comes from, in my case, from my Juklum Sovereign Mantis system. It's a very novel use for this part of the body. Liver 13 we already talked about. We have the Chiman, which is liver 14, which is located at either side of the rib cage, at the center right or center left of the rib cage. Naturally, striking there can break ribs if you use it for a strike, but you can also use it to manipulate an opponent, because this is the serratus muscles are right next to these. And what happens is when you push out one or two or four knuckles off your fist, or you use your fingers and you have very, very strong fingers, and you kind of rub that point, you pressure and you rub it at the same time. This causes the serratus muscles to spasm. And what this causes in turn is an inability of the person to close down their rib cage. So it's very difficult for them to clinch you, to hold you in a clinch, or to hug you, or to choke you, if you can strike that area or rub it very fiercely. Now, it doesn't work with all people. I've found that maybe it works for 85, 90% of people. Some people just don't react. They're not sensitive to that area. But most people, if you rub that area and press against it, or if you strike it, they immediately open up their hands because of that spasm which that point causes.
I'm just thinking if you want to go tickle somebody, that's roughly the area that you're in.
Sometimes, yeah. 3 other points that are used for controlling opponents, rather usually for striking them, though you could strike them potentially, are Tianrong, small intestine 17, that's behind the base of the jaw, Yifang, which is triple warmer 17 behind the ear, and Tianliao, which is triple warmer 15 on the back side of the upper trapezius muscles. So small intestine 17, triple warmer 17, and triple warmer 15, you can press these points, usually with your fingers, to manipulate an opponent. It's very easy. If you touch someone at that point and you pressure them just a little, they tend to flinch, they tend to move around, and you can actually use them in the midst of combat to move somebody, to take them out of their own technique, to divert their attention, etc., etc. So these are very commonly used.
I'm thinking of kids playing on a playground in elementary school. You come up behind someone, you grab them by the back and the neck in that area, and you pinch a little bit, and yeah, you could just walk them around anywhere.
Oh, definitely. And but usually, actually, you'd use small intestine 17 from the front, and you'd use it to manipulate their jaw, and it helps you open their jaw sideways. Then you can grab the jaw, and you can actually, if they have hair, or if you can otherwise grab their head and just hold it in place somewhere, and you can put your fingers behind the back of their jaw. You can actually dislocate the jaw by pulling it.
Wow. Well, we know these points are helpful medicinally and for healing, and I appreciate your overview today on how these are also used martially. I'm particularly struck in our conversation today, really where we began with you talking about Dien. Dien, what did you say? Dien, not Dien Shui.
Dien Mai.
Right. So you're diening the Mai, the channel. This so encapsulates how we think about acupuncture. It's just a delightful little intersection between the martial and the medicinal. So thank you so much for spending some time today.
Thank you for the opportunity. If someone's interested in my work, I have several books which I have authored. You can look up Research of Martial Arts, and The Martial Arts Teacher. The Martial Arts Teacher. Both are available on Amazon, and you can look up my name, Jonathan Bluestein, on YouTube or on Facebook and get in touch with me. I have a lot of interesting, fascinating content about the traditional Chinese martial arts.
Great. I'll make sure all of that is on the show notes page. Jonathan, once again, great to hang out and talk with you.
It was a pleasure to be on the show.
All right, that's it for today's conversation. Hey, if you guys like what you're hearing here, if it's helpful to you, please tell your friends about it. Also, I'm kind of curious. I can look at the download statistics for this podcast, and I see, obviously, there's people in North America that listen to this. There's folks in Australia, Russia, Japan, China. Oh, China, imagine that, China. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.